Please welcome Liana.
Thank you so much, Annie. It's a really beautiful honor to be here at the Women's Visionary Congress with you all. I've attended these events over the years and have been so moved by the depth and the richness and just the density of history that's held by this community. It's been really profound to be part of it over time, and I'm really glad to be with you here today. I had put together a deck to kind of bring everyone up to speed on the journey of maps, and I woke up this morning in a very different place, and also having spent some time here yesterday and some time here today, and just wanting to really connect into my heart and to be more in a relationship here with my community here. And so that is what I'm feeling in this moment, and something else that I think I'll share that I didn't think I was going to share is a little bit of my own origin story. Origin stories are fun, and I love hearing them from others, and there's something happening global in the news today that's relevant to my own story. So I got, like many young people, I had experienced some pretty intense traumas at an early age, and had, I don't know if anyone's ever read the book Girl Interrupted. Anybody know? Yeah, that was my teenage years. And I had a really hard time. I ran away from home. I didn't go to school a lot. I was just couldn't really figure it out how to be part of a world that felt really cruel and unfair, and where there seemed to be a lot of unhappiness and evilness. And so it wasn't until I was a freshman in college, right when I had arrived, that I decided to try psilocybin recreationally with some friends. I had read all the Beat authors and was obsessed with books like The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test before I ever tried a psychedelic. And I consider those writers and authors the giants whose shoulders I stand upon, and the people who taught me about ways of being and living in the world that were different than the Northeast conservative reality I was raised within. They were my only contact and touch points outside of the kind of straight and narrow reality of my family unit. So what ended up happening is I went to Boston University and I became an anti-war activist. And I organized against the Iraq War. I do signature collections to impeach Bush and Cheney for war crimes, which I felt really righteous about at the time and loud about, and nobody seemed to care. And looking back on it, turns out they did tell a bunch of lies, and so that kind of opened my mind as well to, life is not always what it seems and always what you are fed to believe. And so that was really what initiated me on my journey and my path. And I had a cousin who worked as a diplomat in Israel. And after my junior year of college, I spent 4 months in Palestine. I had originally gone over to Israel to work with some people he had put me in touch with as like a summer internship. I pretty quickly defected from my role, which did not please my family. And I ended up meeting these young people playing music in the streets of Jerusalem. And they were smoking hash, and they were listening to this music that I was not familiar with. And they told me, come to the desert, we make psytrance parties in the desert. And I didn't know what that was. And so I went, and it was just the most unbelievable and beautiful experience. And they would share with me that this is a place where Israelis and Palestinians can dance together and be in love together. And waking up yesterday and then today I'm back emotional, the heartbreaking news of, I think the headline was that 260 bodies were found at a psytrance festival that was invaded yesterday morning. And so feeling part of the global trans community and just understanding like where my evolution went from those experiences and really wanting and believing that if we can resolve the conflict in Israel and Palestine, it was the stalemate, going to college, university, studying international relations. I was also double majoring in world religions, looking at the intersection. If we can move past this insurmountable intergenerational conflict, we can find peace in our world. And I really believed that as a young person. I was 20 years old when I went to Israel and Palestine. And what I saw when I spent this time in Palestine was really challenging. And I came back and I ended up dropping out of my senior year of college, and finding a lot of just like confusion around this path of going the foreign diplomacy route, of working within the UN structures, of doing these kinds of things that I thought you were supposed to do to create peace. And I became obsessed with this idea that we needed to heal our consciousness. We needed a different way of thinking. And I became intensely curious about mushrooms. And I ended up dropping out and giving away all my things and hitchhiking down to Central America. And I spent a year there as a young person, trying to make sense of these things that I was experiencing and learning about and trying to like land within. And it was there that my journey with psychedelics really began. And I would go around and try to find, I heard there was little abuelitas who would feed me mushrooms if I went and found them and asked really nicely. And I learned, didn't even have the concept of what a ceremony was or what that would look like. And I didn't have the language around it. And I didn't know, it took me about 4 years after my first mushroom experience to realize that I had what could be called a healing experience. I didn't have any of that language or context. Like, it was also new to me. And I didn't have peers, that were into healing. And for a while I really resisted this like healing arts thing. I was like I'm fine. Like, I don't need healing. What is this? Like, I'm not injured in some way. And in truth, I had pretty severe PTSD from some incidents in my youth. And so but it took me a long time to recognize what was happening. And it was actually down in Mexico that I met these friends from Australia. I ended up going to Australia, doing some permaculture design courses there. And then those friends in Australia, I was sitting on the floor of a friend, and he pulled up the MAPS website. And he said, they're doing a conference next year, and we're gonna come to America, and when we come to America, you should come to this conference with us. And so that's what happened, and I went in 2010 to the MAPS conference in San Jose, California. There was a couple hundred people there, just a handful of people. I was 22 at the time, and that is my origin story of how I got started on this path that I've been on since that time. And I think like one thing that's really interesting, and really what the meat of what I want to share about with you all, my community, is that there's been a lot of confusion lately about MAPS and this thing called the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. And so it's my hope and intention to share really candidly and honestly with you all about the fact that this is a confusing time, and I've also been confused. And so I'm hoping to get into that, and I'm also really hoping to share with you where MAPS is going from here. Rick Doblin set out 37 years ago to prove that there was, in fact, a therapeutic use of MDMA. And in 2024, it'll have been 20 years from when Amy Emerson and others started the MDMA research program at MAPS. So that is how long it has taken to get the research done that's needed to get done. So it's a remarkably long arc of time, and with great success comes enormous challenges. And I think that's a lot of what we've been navigating over time is learning. And maybe I'll just jump right into it, and then I'll circle back to another recent experience that relates to my origin story. But so in 2016, MAPS realized that the research that we had been sponsoring, that in the event of success, there would be an opportunity to sell MDMA as a approved drug product in the event of FDA approval. And at that time, as a nonprofit, there was a recognition of, okay, let's stand up a public benefit corporation that can act as a pharmaceutical company and can take that opportunity that no one had realized was an eventual potential outcome. It wasn't the intent of doing this research. The intent of doing this research was to demonstrate scientifically with strong data that there are healing qualities within MDMA therapy. And so over time, and where I feel like a lot of the core confusion is that we now have two very distinct organizations. And we have spent the past couple of years really pulling apart and separating to be two fully autonomous and independent organizations. And part of the confusion to the public is that MAPS and MAPS PBC are used often interchangeably, right, as this work has been connected. And so to clarify, MAPS has funded and sponsored the research, which I'm very happy to report is complete. There are no more studies that need to happen in order to file for the new drug application. Yeah, and so that has taken enormous amounts of time, so many resources, and has been accomplished through community. And that is so deeply at the heart of what MAPS is, and how Rick and MAPS and the team have been able to take this as far as we all have is through the participation and the connection with a huge constellation and ecosystem of people that have been feeding in and supporting and learning from each other over time. And I really want to acknowledge that. The role of community has been essential in the development of MAPS over time. Which is why it can be hard when there's now like interesting tensions that have been arising over time with some of the directionality that some of this has taken. So we have MAPS, the 501c3, and now we have the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. And I am a spokesperson for MAPS, and I am not a spokesperson for MAPS PBC. And I want to make that really clear, and I'm not here to speak on behalf of them. So I will share that the PBC had the research moved over into them, all the research capabilities, and they've been in the process of standing up a pharmaceutical company that can actually bring MDMA-assisted therapy in the event of FDA approval out to access, out to people who can stand to benefit for them. And we have learned the hard way that that is a very complicated thing to do. There is an enormous amount of compliance and regulations and rules and all kinds of things that have been introduced into our ways of being and talking about this work and doing this work. And so there's a huge learning curve happening right now. And in that massive learning curve, it hasn't, the pathway has not been straight and clean. It's been kind of winding with bends and twists and turns that were unexpected along the way. And so MAPS PBC is very much in this process of getting its feet under it and getting everything that it needs to be fully resourced, to have the right team in place, people from the pharma industry with a lot of experience who might not have the same experience with psychedelics, coming in and helping and kind of meeting of those worlds so that it can go and be all it can be in the world. And so that is what it takes. That's what it's going to take. We've heard from our elders today about this sacred mission that people have been on and took it upon themselves in the 60s and to turn the world on, right? We've heard that a few times throughout the weekend, that there was just such clarity that these things were good and that people deserved access to them. And so here we are where the rubber meets the road. And the medical pathway is a very specific and clearly defined access point, and it is being figured out in all its ways. and it's going to be a very kind of straight and narrow and rigid way of doing things, which is probably not what people expected when they started out spreading these good medicines in the world. And so just wanted to share that and acknowledge that. The phase 3 research is published. You can read about it in Nature magazine, in the New York Times. There's just a big article in September. And so it's a very exciting place to be, and the next steps there are, drug companies at completing phase 3 file for a new drug application. It can take 6 months to a year to hear back from the FDA, and at that point they will know whether or not they have an approved drug product. So with all of that said, that leaves this big question of who are we at MAPS and what are we doing now? Especially because it's been our primary objective and orientation to achieve this goal. And wow, our goal was to do the research, and we did it. It happened. It's amazing. It's truly an amazing achievement. And so we've been in this really beautiful place of just kind of turning the mirror back on ourselves and asking ourselves, well then, what is ours to do in the world, and who are we in this ecosystem, and how can we continue our mission, which is to create safe and legal contexts for people to experience the beneficial uses of psychedelics. Nowhere in there does it say medical only. And it has never been part of MAPS's mission to pursue strictly the medical path. We've always had a drug policy and advocacy department at the organization. And so we've been in that inquiry for some time now, and we're starting to really land with a lot of clarity in some answers. And so that is really what I'm here to share with you today. I'm not going to talk about the work of the PBC. That is theirs to talk about. I'm going to really just share that. And so with that, I'll bring kind of back around to a recent experience that I had, which hopefully can start to paint the picture of who we are as MAPS in the world in this moment and in this opportunity that we're in. And so there's this thing when you have a drug product, the companies tend to focus on expanding into markets that are sizable and are well-resourced, right? That's kind of the how to run a drug company successfully business model in the world. And so we at MAPS have really looked at how can we help people who have often the highest rates of trauma and the least access to care in the world. And so one opportunity that we had actually started back when I joined my partner at the border of Ukraine and Poland at the beginning of the Ukraine war. He does refugee response, and he's there with mass migration events to help support the people who are showing up on the border. And so I decided to join him, and I was there for a month, and then through some connections there, and then other people reaching out to MAPS, there became an opportunity a couple years later to train or to educate, important difference, to educate Ukrainian therapists on the MDMA-assisted therapy protocol. And so in August, I went to Sarajevo, which is a city in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we hosted a 7-day retreat. It was an education event for therapists. We had 55 therapists there, and there were therapists from Ukraine, including a number of military psychiatrists who came from the front lines of Ukraine. They actually, all the Ukrainians rode on a bus together over 3 days to come join us in Sarajevo. We also had therapists from Bosnia and from Serbia. We had therapists from Israel and from Lebanon. We had therapists from Armenia, from Poland, and Czech Republic. And so these are people that I'm not sure people know the history with Sarajevo. Sarajevo was under siege for 4 years in the 90s, from 91 to 95. It ended when there was a genocide of Bosnians over a period of a few days. And here they are 30 years later, and we're all sitting in this room together, and they're explaining to us how they've never recovered from the war. And there are these therapists explaining to us their own trauma and their trauma of the people that they try to help, and how their tools have been inadequate and ineffective in helping them really recover. And I'm learning so much about one of the core wounds is that many Serbians and the government doesn't actually recognize the genocide that happened. And one of the awarenesses that in order to move past trauma, we have to witness it first. We have to really witness and be with it and acknowledge its validity. And then here we have Ukrainians in the room hearing from the Bosnians and Serbians that 30 years later they're still struggling. And the Ukrainians are wondering, is that going to be me? Is that going to be us 30 years from now? And there was an Armenian woman there. And I'm not sure, again, so much learning. There's been a war with Azerbaijan, which actually was recently in the news, and this was after I had been there. But she was telling us about it, and she had gone to the front lines and treated somebody who was a father in this family, and he had been a victim of torture. And she shared with us what he said to her. He said that while he was being tortured, he could hear the cries of the mothers of his torturers. And of the entire week together, I think that single story really shifted the environment of the room, because there was this recognition that the mothers of everyone on all sides, their cries are the same and their pain is the same. And it doesn't matter what side of the conflict that you're on. And it was this really exquisite and tender moment, her sharing of this story. And I think another really powerful moment is we had Bella von Gerschen there, and she worked for the Israeli Ministry of Health, and she is in charge, the head of trauma for the country of Israel. And she came and shared about her time volunteering in Ukraine and how the principles of what she learned about psychedelic therapy, how those principles can be applied without the use of psychedelics. And she shared about how she did that. And at the end, she shared that she was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, and that she was Russian. And that really hit some of the Ukrainians in the room. And this burly, tough military psychiatrist broke down crying and said, I never imagined a Russian could have enough compassion to come support the people of my country. And she had gone to Bakhmut after the atrocities there and spent a month there supporting them. And so here I am in this beautiful, powerful, really deep, really intense experience in Sarajevo in August. And just, it really struck me how kind of where I started out as a young person, really trying to understand how we can move to peace, I understand that it's been our evolutionary almost requirement as a species to commit atrocities unto each other. And everyone's history has it. There's no one's whose history and whose ancestors don't have it, all sides of it. And it's made me really curious about if it is in fact our evolutionary destiny to be a peaceful species, how can we get there? And so when I think about where we're at with MAPS today, and I think about the seeds that got planted with these people in Sarajevo back in August, and this was just kind of like let's see if we can put something together, let's see if we can, those people are going to go back to their countries. And I said this to them at the end, we're not going to bring psychedelic therapy to your country, you are. We can't know how to do that for you and your people. We can't know if this training is culturally appropriate and relevant to you and your people. Thank you for being brave and courageous to come be here and learn this with us, but now we need you to help, give us feedback. We can support you, we can help you, but all of you are now, the ambassadors of this work to your countries. And so, and now there's interest and opportunities from universities in Poland, in Bosnia, in other places around the world, and the yearning for healing. I mean, that was so clear with everyone present, is that they want the tools and they want to heal. And the Ukrainians made it very clear that they are fighting this war to the end because they will not allow their children to inherit this. Their children will not be fighting in war, and that is why they're fighting it to the end. And so, I share this to like paint a picture of the kinds of things, right, that our work isn't done if we are successful here in the United States. If we open access in a very specific way that's very powerful and very meaning and very seismic and you know, shifts a lot for a lot of things, but that our work is broader and bigger than that. And so with that, it's also tied into this idea that we had moved the research over into the PBC, and now MAPS is starting to take some research back in doing it and supporting research as MAPS. And so we're playing around with this idea right now, and we're moving towards it, and it is not a fully complete and baked thought yet. And I feel comfortable sharing it here, mostly because I told Annie that she might not be allowed to post this video after, because I wanted to be able to speak freely with you, like my community, my peers who've been on this path with us for so long. But so the vision is to re-establish MAPS's research capabilities. And that is something that we are very excited to do, and we realize there's this whole spectrum of ways that we have been supporting researchers over time. Everything from like this light touch of, oh, I'm at this university, I want to do this thing. Okay, great, we can make a few introductions, a few connections, share some protocols, share some information, some data, things like that. So that's like one side of the spectrum, all the way to co-sponsoring a study and really like jumping in on something with people. And so like whether it's an accelerator or an incubator or something of that nature, we are very excited to reestablish the S in MAPS, which stands for studies, and to be able to pursue research in various forms again. Also not just clinical trials for drug development, but all sorts of sociological, anthropological. There's all kinds of interesting things that people come to us all the time seeking support on studying, and so we're excited to do that. The other huge dimension of our work, which has always been there, is our policy and advocacy work. Every major bill that you have seen come through, those people's offices always call MAPS and they ask what we think. And so our policy director, Ismail Ali, is such a superstar, as many of you know, and so we're really building out more of the kind of policy think tank capabilities, and then tying in with this other huge component of MAPS, which is our community and building the ecosystem. And so with that, it's also, again, connecting people to each other, connecting resources to each other. We're not going to be the group that kind of drives the individual bills forward. That's going to happen on these state-by-state bases, town-by-town bases. But we'll be there as, you know, expert witnesses and with white papers and with information to help move this whole thing forward. And so that's what our team's been quietly doing this whole time. And so I think they're getting ready to do that a little bit more clearly and loudly. And so there's a lot of exciting work there. Also, part of policy and advocacy is helping really to paint the picture of what a post-prohibition world can look like. And so one of the things that we are doing is we've created a first responder training. And so this is being piloted in the city of Denver, where that was the first city to decriminalize mushrooms, and now obviously Colorado has gone ahead and gone broader. And the idea is that our first responders, our firefighters, our EMTs, our police officers, it's an opportunity to be part of this more compassionate policing movement that's happening, and it's an opportunity to educate our first responders on how to address somebody who might be experiencing a psychedelic emergency or difficult or challenging experience. And so we've got, you know, police officers and all kinds of lieutenants and great people part of this training, and it's a real partnership with first responders, and we're hoping that this kind of training, that other cities might be interested in doing this kind of training and helping their people understand that with the coming law changes, with this post-prohibition world, that there is a way for law enforcement and others to interact that can be supportive and not create more harm. And part of that also is just like, we're not the scary boogie monsters in the corner. Like we're not trying to like run and hide from the police. Rick talks about how he used to always think of himself as the prey and the police were the predators. And here we are having like very real and meaningful relationships and hopefully opening the hearts and changing the minds of some of these people who have painted people who use drugs in really negative stereotypes. And so that's a project of the policy and advocacy team that I think is really exciting, and part of this kind of culture work that we're about. We're trying to change the culture at every level, meet people where they're at, and build like structurally some real things that can help us build towards this post-prohibition world that we all know in our hearts is possible. And then this community piece is just like so huge, and throwing psychedelic science was a big part of that. Did anyone here go to psychedelic science in Denver? Okay, awesome. That was a pretty outrageously overwhelming experience. If you were overwhelmed and couldn't pick what to do, because we had 10 simultaneous stages running the entire time, you were not alone. But it was it felt like this seismic shift happened. And we had like 2,300 media hits after the event, like 2,300. We were on every major news station from ESPN to CNN. And there was like this quote in the Washington Post that I loved, which was something along the lines of like, a former governor of Texas, an NFL star, and like a child of Hollywood royalty like walk into a psychedelics conference. And that was what happened. So it feels like it was one of these inflection points which we've had over time. We can kind of mark these points in history when things really feel like there was a seismic shift in people opening and who was being attracted in. And so we are just like, we've been digesting that event all summer. I'm happy to report there will be another one in 2025. Yeah, not 2024. We're thinking a 2-year cadence is a lot more manageable for everyone involved. And so we're looking forward to that and to continuing that. And I'll just share as well, I had did anyone go to Deep Space who went to the conference? Yeah. I was really, it was my side project. And I'm proud to claim it because I had to fight for it. And I really felt like that I didn't want the conference to just be talks from stage and expo floor booths. That we needed a place to express the culture a little bit more completely and bring in some of the other members of our community who wouldn't necessarily be invited to a psychedelic science conference. The artists, the creatives, the healers, these other kinds of ways of being part of the psychedelic culture and community. And it was super fun for me because I used to throw raves and festivals. And so I got to call up all my old friends and have them come do their thing. And it felt really important to have that space and that energy and that vibration. And of all the crazy things I did for psychedelic science, I think I'm most proud of Deep Space for sure. It was so fun. Yeah, and I have to say, people were really not sure about what I was trying to do, but then it made sense. And and yeah, so that was really, felt really, really good to do. And I think, you know, we're looking out across the ecosystem around us, and one of the visions MAPS has for itself is to become eventually an organization that can provide grants and can be tangibly part of building the ecosystem. And in many ways, we've already been doing that. We have done things over the years. There's small things we do, like the MAP for psychedelic, the Global Psychedelic Societies Network, just as an example. But yeah, so we're here. Like, MAPS is super here. We're here for it all. It's been this like kind of roller coastery, wild time of trying to navigate and figure out and who, you know, crawl through the unknowns of growing up and getting really our legs under us in every way so that we can be firmly established enough to hold this new era that we're in right now, where there's just so much more awareness and interest in psychedelics than ever before in the modern era. And so that's what we're here for. And I really want to invite all of you to consider yourselves part of our community, our family, and part of this journey, because you are. None of this would happen without everybody holding their unique role. And it's going to take that. It's not something that we've ever been able to do on our own and can't do on our own. And so that is what I wanted to share with you all today. Yeah. I don't know what time it is and how long I spoke.
Yeah, we have some time for questions. We have about another 25 minutes.
Great.
For some questions, and I can play Oprah and move the mic around. Who would like to ask a question?
I just wanted to tell Liana how awesome Deep Space was.
Oh, thank you.
Such a wonderful space to be in. Thank you.
Totally, I'm so glad. Yeah, we learned a lot. The sound could have been a little bit better, I hear, but
It's deep space.
Yeah.
There's no sound in deep.
Just a real quick, the 2025, is that going to be in Denver as well?
Yeah, so we have, we put out a survey. This was going to be one of the slides I shared with everyone, just on like what people's experience was and attitudes were. And there was an overwhelming reply from our attendees that they liked it in Denver. And I think what's really interesting about Denver is we have a governor and a mayor who are rolling out the red carpet for us and who really want to embrace all of us, psychedelic culture. Denver wants to be a psychedelic city. That's been clearly expressed to us, and so it's looking likely that we will return to the welcoming embrace of Denver. Yeah.
I have a question. So, how many people presently work for MAPS, the nonprofit, and what was your budget last year?
Yeah, so our budget last year, well, it's a little confusing with the conference because that was a huge part of our budget. So, and I'm just going to pull that out separately. And so our budget last year was about $8 million, and there's about 40 people at MAPS. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, just a second.
I'm from Oregon, and so I was just wondering if any of the resources are if you're thinking about doing events in some of the other states that are joining Colorado in this mission to bring the rest of the country along with us, and just maybe putting out a pitch or a question about doing little satellite events or you know, things like that in Oregon, because we'd be really happy to, you know, host some of those things, or even just, you know, guest panels at the Oregon Country Fair or something like that. But you know, an event would be great, and I think, you know, the more you know, places that geographically that we can, because not everyone can make it to Denver.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And then also, if there were maybe grants or things to get some of the pioneers that don't have the credentials of some of the people jumping into the game now, if there was any way to get some of those people more involved that have been, below the surface all these years, so.
Yeah, two very good questions. I'll start just with the first. First of all, I love Oregon Country Fair. It's so magnificent. And we are, the last big psychedelic science conference was in 2017. In 2019, we had this idea to do like the psychedelic cities, and we did an event in Austin that was about 1,000 people. And we had planned to do that in a few more places, smaller events, city specific, and then 2020 happened. And so it was really interesting to then like take a couple of years break and then jump from like a 3,000 person in 2017 to a 12,400 person event in Denver in 2023. And so I think right now our strategy is to really focus on this like kind of mega event. We worked on the event with Kevin Boktic from Horizons, and I know he's doing an Oregon event in December. And so that's Horizons in Portland. I think it's towards the beginning of December. 1 to 3, the very beginning of December. And so that will be happening, and there will surely be MAPS representation there. And so, I think the other side to that as well is like we really want to gather the MAPS community and have it be easier to find the others. And so we're looking at ways to partner and work with others and to really do that so that people who are interested in MAPS and what we're doing can be connected to things happening locally wherever they are. So we're hoping to do more of that in the future. Your second question is a very important question and really much harder to answer. There's so many that have been the pioneers and the brave ones and had the courage to do these things when some of the people joining now, are just like freely texting each other like about each other's shamans and sourcing this and that when like people risked their lives and spent time in jail and risked having their children being taken from them, and did this work at great risk. And those people now are often left behind, as you're saying. And it's a really hard question to answer. With the growing industry, and this is a little bit more of my like work at North Star hat, that's this other nonprofit I'm involved in. I try to encourage anybody who's new in this space or trying to jump into this space to really have respect, reverence, and to do their research and to really know the histories that are involved with these things. I mean, places like the Women's Visionary Congress are unfortunately one of the few rare places where I feel like there's a lot of the old and mixing in with some of the new. And I want there to be more of those spaces because there's so much learning that can happen from this new wave of people that are coming in and feeling really amped up after 6 months from their first trip to start the next great psychedelic company. So I think there's a lot of learning and humility that could be hopefully earned from those interactions, and I'm really hoping for more spaces like that, like this right here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, MAPS has always traditionally done a talk at every WVC we've had, and the WVC gave many of the people at MAPS, especially the women, one of their first opportunities to speak publicly, including Amy Emerson.
Yeah, Amy, who's the CEO of the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. It's been with the work for a long time.
Right, so it's been an important mission to try to provide a respectful platform for people who work with MAPS, people of all genders. And so thank you for continuing the tradition.
It's an honor. And
we do strive to create spaces for the transfer of intergenerational knowledge. It's always been a big part of our mission.
I personally have benefited from that over the years in environments with you and others, and it's been such an important part of my journey and my time in this movement.
Great, that's great to hear. Well, let we thank our elders
Yes,
for speaking
so much.
today and being part of this as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Question?
Still time?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we have time.
Thank you so much for sharing the vision of what's next for MAPS. I feel very passionate about MAPS even before hearing about, what is next. I was wondering as well, what would be the best way to maybe help or get involved in any way, shape, or form? You may have just answered that by saying, educate yourself and go to the events and learn as much as you can. But anything you could speak to for us to help support the phase 2, whatever you want to call it, the next vision.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing I really notice is that it takes all kinds. So understanding, what's your skill set, what's your unique thing that you want to bring and offer, and then looking for those pockets and opportunities. There's Psychedelic Alpha keeps a really good job posting board for companies inside the space. So I always try to point people to there just to kind of see. And it used to be that, we just needed researchers and scientists and like movement builders, but now we need accountants, we need business advisors, we need all kinds of people. So there really is, space for everyone. And I think the other thing I like to say is just stay curious and really follow that curiosity and follow it all the way through, however far that takes you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Liana. I also want to start with a huge compliment for that conference. I mean, it takes a team to bring all these people and diverse perspectives together. So even if there was critique around who was involved and who not, I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
And it was diverse to a certain point. And another thing, I think MAPS is very strong. I was following you over the last 10 years, internationally as well, is the training component. That's also something you highlight. And my big question is regarding the accountability, because the reality is that in most parts of the world, there is no training. There are very talented people working on the ground, including in this room. And on the other side, harm can happen from misuse of power, both in the underground and above ground.
Yep.
So to me, I think that accountability can best be kind of accomplished once everything is above ground. And so my question would be, what are the efforts that MAPS is taking to also work aside from the medical approach on the decriminalization of MDMA and potentially other drugs?
I mean, that's always my answer, is that there cannot be accountability and safety in the underground. We have to take it above ground. There's just no way, there's no clear and clean communication channels. Of course there can be in some minor ways within communities, in peer groups and people like that. I think it's so important if you're working in the underground that you have a peer group that you take cases to, that you share honestly with, and that if you're seeking to work with somebody in the underground, that's one of the questions you ask your facilitators: who are your peers and how do you hold each other accountable? It's just, we have to get this above ground. We've got to find and create these pathways and to move the needle on drug policy reform and on opening access. And so my answer to that is really it's the policy and advocacy work. There's not a specific program we have that's working on shaping the training in certain places. Certain members of our team or people in our ecosystem have been part of different committees and working groups in different states. I'm part of a subcommittee in Colorado that's focused on how to regulate businesses and ensure that they behave ethically. So some people on our team kind of work in those regards, but it's really the larger, broader policy picture that we really need to have in place to create the most safety for people. Yeah, it's a hard one. It really is.
We've been talking a lot about underserved communities this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to do more research. What's the opportunity for MAPS to make a difference in the community-wide underserved, particularly, poorer communities, city communities and community work? What do you see y'all doing?
Yeah, so this is a very good question. So one of the things that is going to be necessary to have an effective health equity program, most pharma companies have some sort of health equity or access programs. I think one of the things that might really serve this movement that we're in is having a third-party administrated health equity, health access fund, and there are some people working on that. So that would be specifically to subsidize and cover the costs of treatment for people who cannot afford it. That again is the medical context. And I think that the bigger question and the bigger answer is how are we opening other forms of access outside of that context? And so again, the answer is drug policy reform. And the other huge part of this, which is another huge component of MAPS that I didn't quite mention, but it's part of the conference, is education. What are the messages that are getting mainstreamed right now? Is it that you can microdose to be more productive for your Silicon Valley job? Like, I personally don't love that as like the big message that's getting mainstreamed about psychedelics right now. And so that's another huge inquiry, is this, what are the important messages to get out there as more awareness comes, and what are we doing for public education? And for me, one of the most important things that something MAPS has incubated is the Zendo project, which has a training on peer support, which you will be hearing about next. And for me, education on peer support, that's how most people have access to psychedelics currently, is with their peers. And I believe that that will continue to be a very large trend. And so when we're talking about people in underserved communities who don't have resources to pay for expensive therapies, to find the thing I don't know, how can we empower communities with the right information and education and support so that they can support each other through these experiences?
What about research projects themselves that say we're gonna embed ourselves in Richmond, California?
Yeah,
and we're
for
gonna
sure.
do community work among the peers. We actually
Yeah.
have 100 or 200 members of the community because of microdosing or doing ceremony together.
Yeah, I definitely see more opportunity for those kinds of research projects, not just at MAPS, but in our larger movement. And there's some very interesting people doing interesting work pushing into those arenas, and I think that there's a lot to learn right now. So it's going to take a very multifaceted, multi-pronged approach. And I don't know if anyone saw the film A Table of Our Own. Was anyone at the screening in Oakland? It's just an incredible film that is for and by the Black community around claiming their own narratives around who this medicine is for and how it can be utilized to support and heal each other. And so supporting movements like that feel essential as well. But yeah, we have our work cut out for us. Yeah. She's being Oprah.
Hi, congratulations, really, really fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm especially curious about the framework for what you did in Bosnia and how what the future of that might be, how you selected that project of the millions that are relevant.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that in a lot of ways, been involved in mental health and torture
Victims
recovery
of torture, yeah.
for many, quite a time.
Mm-hmm.
So I really am curious. I hadn't known that you were doing anything like that, and really hats off and really deep gratitude. But also a lot of curiosity about how that works and what your future is with it. I also have a sort of a burning question, which is, how did it happen that the Navajo weren't involved in a kind of ceremonial way in the Denver conference. At least that's what I understood.
They were. The opening remarks were from a young local Navajo woman of our conference, and we had much consultation over years prior. And yeah, there's there's a pretty viral video out there, and there's a lot that can be said about that. And what I will share is there's always so much to learn and so much more listening to do. And we had amazing Indigenous and First Nations partners over the years who helped build our program with us and who were highly involved in the creation of the event with us. And so both are true. Yeah. And so, yeah. And what the video doesn't show is that Rick did ask them to come up on stage and to share. It did, yeah, I don't know, there's a few versions. But yeah, so, yeah, yeah. And that's, after the conference, from people who weren't there, that was the number one. I was getting hit up constantly with that same question. And it's a good question, an important question, and we will continue to learn. And it's very humbling. So, yeah.
Can you address the first one about the...
Yeah, okay, so how did that come about? Well, through people reaching out who are from Ukraine, and some other members of government and health ministry and people like that. There was actually a small psychedelic conference that happened in Kyiv last May. It was the first event of its kind in Ukraine. And so with what's been happening, there's been an awareness of not wanting to onboard the trauma of this war in a way that causes lasting damage. That being said, Ukraine is a very conservative country. There hasn't been an appetite for this kind of research and activities in the country from any official places. So this was an opportunity to kind of stick our toe in the water with people who we were in contact with and who reached out to us expressing an interest in learning about these things. And so our approach was, okay, sure, come, we can share education. We can share education and teach and share the protocol, and hopefully that can support and help people in what they're doing anyways. And so it's a first step. And the way that we have seen this happen in other places is like the work in Israel. And by the way, our MAPS Israel team were the trainers in Sarajevo. And I've been in touch with them the past few days. And it's just such a complicated time. There's a MAPS Israel event planned for December as well, a conference there. But yeah, so it was very organic. It was very much like people reaching out. The other side of the equation always was that we had funders who said we would fund that. We would be interested in supporting, helping to potentially create future access to these things in Ukraine. And so it was a combination of those two things. And then we picked Sarajevo. We had other contacts there, and it was a very neutral place for them to come to, and a place they could travel to by land. And so there's a lot of factors that went into it. And then it's super organic. It's just like people we've met over the years through our travels, talking to people, reaching out to others, and kind of building the roster. There wasn't a giant formal announcement about it. There wasn't a call for applicants. It came in a different way. And again, this was the first of its kind of education event. So for us as well, it was also, how will this work? What will this be like? What can come from this? And we're still in that process and experiment right now. So. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll take a few more questions. I'd like to ask one, and then perhaps we can take one more from the audience. My question has to do with SB 58, the decriminalization bill that passed the California legislature and was vetoed by Governor Gavin Newsom in a letter yesterday, which we read here. And so I'm wondering, since MAPS has been involved in policy, what you think will happen next in terms of next steps to get the bill passed, not just the legislature, but the governor's desk
Yeah.
the next time around.
Well, he did leave us some pretty clear instructions on the things he would need, right? What I find ironic is normally the writing of regulations and comes after you pass the bill, which forces the creation of the regulations. But, you know, we have a lot of that together. We've got parameters and safety guidelines and the kinds of things that he's looking for. And so I actually haven't been in touch with anyone from my policy team since yesterday, since hearing about it. But I can imagine that there will be an effort to educate the legislature and the governor on the kinds of things that he says he would need to see in order to pass a bill like this. I'm also hoping that there can be a deeper education around the uses of psychedelics that aren't, you know, strictly in this medicalized context. And so it feels to me like we are needing to, as a movement, create a lot of specific education around how to do these things effectively. And we've got some models that we've, in Oregon and Colorado and elsewhere, that are being stood up right now. So hopefully we can take those learnings and put them in front of him and make some movement. But unfortunately, I don't really feel like that was the real reason why he vetoed. So I hope it's enough. I hope that there's enough can be shown to him and publicly for him to see that we've got this and that we're ready to try this. Yeah.
Do you think it was more a matter of his presidential ambitions?
I feel like that's the prevailing suspicion, and I also suspect that there's some sort of higher office ambitions and sensitivity around his records. He also vetoed a different bill yesterday as well on banning the caste system or discrimination from caste. And so there's some other speculation in the New York Times this morning about why he did that. And it was similar to these kinds of ambitions he might have and the things he doesn't want to have in his record and who he doesn't want to piss off.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So the caste system from in India, okay.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
so, I just wasn't
Yeah,
right.
I mean, his excuse was that there's anti-discrimination laws already, and so this wasn't necessary. And the people who put the bill forward are saying this is necessary because we're experiencing it, and so please.
Taking a lot of money out of Trudeau's,
Yeah.
and we want to put it into you, Gavin.
Yeah. So, but yeah. All
Thank
right.
you. We'll take one final question. Anyone have a final question before we
Go ahead.
say thank you and goodbye?
So forgive me if this is more of a MAPS PDC question, but
Sure.
I'm given to understand that a lot of funding for the later phases of pharmaceutical approval for MDMA was from Republican-leaning lobbies, and you mentioned before that you don't know if tech bros microdosing is the best message for psychedelic advocacy. But if we're going to bring things above ground, is there any kind of psychedelic advocacy messaging that you would want to suppress, and how do you decide what sorts of messages are going to be most fruitful for bringing this to a place where you'd like to see it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so for me, the most fruitful messages are around safety, something along the lines of like, what's the don't drink and drive of psychedelics, right? And how do we get those messages to people so that they can understand that this is a serious matter, consuming a psychedelic, and requires reverence and respect and education and preparation beforehand. But to answer your other question, one of MAPS's principles is be the bridge. And to see past the paradox. Those are actually two principles. And so what's been interesting in a story that Rick has shared about accepting money from Rebecca Mercer, $5 million, was that came without the kinds of strings attached that we've received from other much more liberal funders. And so if people want to fund the work, and her interest was in the ways in which MDMA assisted therapy can help veterans, then who are we to say no to that, right? And it's why we had the former governor of Texas with us in Denver, who spoke right before the current governor of Colorado, who's openly gay and incredibly liberal, and that's part of what we're here to do, is to build the bridge between people. We live in such a divisive time, in a polarizing time, and I think what I appreciate is this appeal towards our common humanity and to our common desire to heal from the many pains of life, and so that is the intention there.
Great, thank you, Liana. Appreciate it. Thank you for making sure that we can continue to have the MAPS presence here as we always